The pets went first. This detail is in the records because the records of Zaun are incomplete in many places and specific in a few. The neighborhood around where Mundo grew up had a particular and unexplained absence of animals during his childhood years. Then his family was gone. Then, across a period of time that spanned his adult career, 38 separate investigations were opened by Zaun's authorities and closed for the same reason: no evidence sufficient to prosecute. 38. The absence of evidence is itself a kind of evidence, not the kind that holds up in any proceeding, but the kind that tells you something about the precision of whoever is responsible. Someone who leaves no traces 38 times is not careless. They are something more unsettling than careless. His name is Dr. Mundo, and the story of what he has built from a life without conscience and a scientific curiosity about pain is the most disturbing kind of story, not because it ends in catastrophe, but because it has not ended at all. New here? Subscribe. Every week, a League of Legends story told the way it deserves to be heard. Zaun produces many things that the world above it would prefer not to think about. It produces them partly because of the conditions, the specific combination of chemical exposure, economic pressure, and institutional absence that shapes people in the lower city into forms that the upper city does not have to encounter directly, and it produces them partly because Zaun has always been the kind of place where things that cannot happen elsewhere happen, because the mechanisms that prevent them elsewhere are thinner here, or absent, or actively operated by people who have calculated that certain kinds of production are more profitable than certain kinds of enforcement. Mundo grew up in this environment. What he brought to it was something the environment did not create but recognized immediately: an absence where other people have something, not cruelty exactly. Cruelty implies feeling, the specific pleasure of inflicting harm. He did not have that either. What he had was a thoroughgoing indifference to pain as a category, not his own pain, anyone's pain. The pain of other things was information, not a moral problem, not an emotional experience. Data. This orientation in a different environment might have produced a remarkable surgeon. In Zaun, with the specific combination of resources and absence of oversight available to him, it produced something more complicated. He pursued medical credentials. He obtained them, not through any particular deception. His academic performance was, by all accounts, exceptional, because the analytical capacity that made him indifferent to suffering also made him excellent at understanding biological systems. The knowledge required for the credentials was knowledge he found genuinely interesting. He acquired it without effort. The 38 investigations began while he was still practicing. Here is the part that the official records of Zaun cannot fully capture. The question of what Dr. Mundo was actually doing was not simply criminal. He was, in the specific way of someone who is both a scientist and something that operates outside ordinary moral categories, working on a problem. The problem was pain, not how to cause it. That was trivially available to anyone with basic anatomical knowledge and the necessary absence of moral constraint. The interesting problem, the one that occupied him through decades of practice and experimentation, was more fundamental: what pain did to a body and a mind, and specifically what it was possible to do to the systems that received and processed pain in order to modify that relationship. He was looking for the limit, not the limit of how much pain a thing could experience. That was a question with an answer that most systems reached quickly and catastrophically. The more interesting limit was the other direction: how much pain could be absorbed, suppressed, rerouted, or fundamentally altered through intervention in the specific mechanisms of the nervous system that mediated the experience. How much could a biological system endure and continue operating if the relationship between the damage being done and the experience of that damage was changed at its root? He worked on chemical methods, on the primitive structures of the brain, the parts that existed before consciousness, that operated below the level of what most people called thought, that drove the most fundamental responses, on adrenaline, on aggression as a suppressor of pain response, on the specific pathways through which damage became suffering and suffering became incapacitation. He found answers. The chemical approaches were most productive. The brain's deeper structures, the regions responsible for the fight-or-flight response, for the flooding of the body with the specific hormonal cocktail that suppresses pain in moments of extreme threat, could be accessed and manipulated in ways that extended their function far beyond what ordinary circumstances produced. He found ways to activate these systems artificially, to maintain their activation, to prevent the crash that ordinarily followed. Aggression was a tool, not random violence, but the specific physiological state of a body preparing to cause harm, the particular combination of elevated heart rate, heightened sensory acuity, and the specific neurochemistry that moves pain signals to secondary priority. He found this state could be induced, sustained, and deepened through intervention at the biochemical level. The result was not invulnerability. The result was something more interesting, a body that experienced damage normally but processed that experience differently at every subsequent stage. The answers required subjects. The subjects required conditions. The conditions required a certain kind of environment. Zaun provided all of these things. The body Mundo now occupies is the most direct evidence of where his research eventually led. At some point, and the transition was gradual enough that no single moment can be identified, as the before and after, he began applying his findings to himself, not from any shortage of other subjects. From the specific logic of a scientist who has arrived at conclusions that cannot be fully verified from the outside and requires internal validation. The most reliable data point is always direct experience. He modified himself. The modifications were not cosmetic, they were structural, deep changes to the systems he had been studying. Changes that produced a body that operated according to rules different from those that applied to ordinary biological matter. He became in the process something that the pain thresholds he had established in his research genuinely could not reach in any ordinary sense. Not because he could not be damaged, because the relationship between damage and the experience of damage had been altered so fundamentally that the two no longer moved together the way they were supposed to. He also, as a side effect of the process, became something that the way he spoke and the way he moved no longer quite mapped onto the categories that applied to people who had not done what he had done to themselves. The conversation he had with his own consciousness during those modifications was not one that left all parties intact. This does not appear to trouble him. Here is what Noxus saw when they found him. An empire that runs on war has specific interests in the science of damage tolerance. An army that could be modified to experience less incapacitation from combat wounds is an army that performs better in the specific circumstances that armies are required to perform in. An empire that could extend its military effectiveness through applied science of the kind Mundo had been developing was an empire that had found something worth acquiring. They acquired him, not through force. Mundo presented no particular management challenge to an empire accustomed to managing things considerably more dangerous than an unusually altered surgeon. He was given latitude. He was given resources. He was given the understanding that his research could continue in the directions he chose within the context of an arrangement that made his work available to Noxian applications when applications were relevant. He accepted, not because he valued the Empire's purposes, which he did not find particularly interesting, because the Empire had access to things that his previous arrangements in Zaun had not provided. Scale. The kind of scale that made certain experiments possible that had been impossible before, for purely logistical reasons. He continues working. What the experiments have been producing in the years since the arrangement with Noxus was formalized is not, in the standard records, fully documented. Some of the documentation that does exist has been classified at levels that make it effectively inaccessible. Some of the documentation has simply not been written because the people who conducted it were the experiment. Mundo is not troubled by documentation gaps. He is not troubled by much. The question of what precisely he is building toward, what the ultimate application of his understanding of pain tolerance and biological modification would look like if it were fully realized, is one that he has never fully articulated in a form that anyone has been able to record and analyze. He works in the direction of his interests. His interests are consistent. The results are visible in his body, and his body, whatever else it has become, is still moving, still experimenting, still finding new thresholds to test against what he has already built. He has not found his limit yet. He does not believe he will. If this story reached you, subscribe. Every week, the full lore of a League of Legends champion, told the way it deserves to be heard.